May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Many years ago, I got an iPod for Christmas. This was a big deal. Nobody in my family had an iPod. And my family and my friends had all chipped in to buy me this wondrous thing. This one was about this big. All it did was play music, black and white. No photos, no games. You couldn't turn it this way or that way. But I was the only one who had one, and I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And I loved my iPod. I mean, I had it with me all the time. It was one of my favorite possessions. A year and a day after I got my iPod, of course the day after the warranty ran out, it stopped running. And not knowing really how to fix it, I was pretty exasperated, and I was saying to my friends, my iPod quit. They said, well, just throw it away and get a new one. They're not really meant to last that long anyway. Throw it away. Get a new one. It wasn't that much longer when my new refrigerator started to make a whole lot of noise. Rattling. Every time the compressor went on. Rattling, 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 rattling. Called the serviceman. He came out. And he said, well, lady, do you have a warranty on this thing? I said, well, I did, but it just ran out. And he said, well, you need a new compressor. And I said, well, how much is that going to cost me? He said, well, you really don't want to know. My advice is to get rid of this fridge and just get a new one. It's going to cost you more to replace the compressor in this fridge than to just go buy a new one. Just throw it out. Get a new one. We are at a culture, at a time in the evolution of our humanity when so many things are disposable. Plates, cups, dinnerware. We go through drive-thrus and we get our food in paper or plastic. When things don't work, often the first reaction is, well, just throw it away and get a new one. Just throw it away. We're also at a time in the life of our society when you might go through that same drive-thru and get your food in paper, and the next thing they'd say is, would you like to supersize that? Those 50 French fries might not be enough. What if I give you 150 French fries? We were driving cross country and I came across Big Gulp. I really think somebody was filling up, looked to me like a cooler with a handle. Because, 16 ounces of Coke isn't nearly enough. 52 ounces might be enough to get you through the next hour or so. We live in this economy where things are disposable. And where we are essentially taught, media tries to convince us that there's just not enough, that we need more. Our gospel lesson today teaches us a little bit about God's economy, in contrast to the economy that we all live in, work in, live with every day. We hear the story of the feeding of the 5,000, which of all of Jesus' miracle stories is the only one that we find in all four gospel lessons. Lots of them we see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but only the feeding stories do all four gospel writers include, which always says to me, pay attention. There must be something here that they want us to learn about. Because the feeding of the 5,000 today teaches us about God's economy. And the first piece of that is, 1, 5 loaves, 2 fish. You can't, that's not going to be enough. There's not going to be enough. If I was sitting up here and said, well, let's see, I have 5 loaves and 2 fish for all of us to have lunch, you would look at me like I was crazy. There's just not enough. And what happens? Jesus blesses it, begins to pass out the food, and there's enough. There's enough. Not just barely enough. There is enough for everyone to eat their fill. There is enough for everyone to be satisfied. There is enough for everyone to get up from that meal and go on about his or her day feeling full and content and satisfied. Because while in our economy, there's never enough, in God's economy, there is always enough. And then there's that wonderful line too. When everyone is finished eating, Jesus says to the disciples, "Go gather up the fragments so that not one will be lost." Not one will be lost. How much stuff do we throw away? Mountains of stuff we throw away. Fragments of all kinds of things. Christina and I have just been moving into our house, and even after throwing away all kinds of stuff in Toledo, we threw away all kinds of stuff in Santa Clarita. Not a fragment will be lost. And I don't think Jesus was really just talking about bread. And I don't think the gospel is just talking about bread. Jesus was also talking about all those people who were gathered to see him, who believed in him, who watched him heal the sick. Not one of them would be lost. And yet how easy is it for people in our culture to get lost? People on the edge. People who we might even refer to as a fragment. We hosted Family Promise here this week and had wonderful families. People working so hard to get back on their feet, but people on the edge. I bet a lot of us, if we had time to sit together and tell our stories, have on occasion been people on the edge. You're living through a divorce, and all those friends that you and your spouse used to spend time with suddenly aren't quite there the way they were before. And you're pushed out a little bit on the edge. Or you lose your job. And that comfort routine that you had every day of getting up, going to work, feeling useful, feeling worthwhile is taken away. And what happens? We feel on the edge. There's all kinds of things in our life that force us to feel pushed, to feel on the edge, perhaps to feel like a fragment. But in God's economy, every fragment is gathered up, so not a single one will be lost. Not just bread, but people. All of us. The gospel lesson tells us this morning that in God's economy, there will always be enough. We will always have what we need. But also that we will never be lost. That God always comes looking for us. That God always gathers those fragments. Fragments of things, fragments of people. Our gospel lesson has this wonderful message this morning. It invites us to step out of our own economy, the one that we live in and day out, that we work in day out. Invites us to step back. Reminds us that we are also a part of God's economy, where there's enough, where you're enough, and where none of us are ever lost. Amen.